Welcome to Beshwork. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I know Robert's in Brisbane, so it's his evening. Been looking forward to our chat. So we frame this webinar as a conversation on smart energy and technology trends and innovations. We've got a lot to cover, and I'm sure we won't get through it all, but hey, no one really knows what we're going to miss out in case we do missing anything out. So that's the bonus of being on this side of the camera. So it might be handy if each of you could introduce yourselves and your business aims for the year ahead. Charlie, should we start with you?
So I'm Charlie, founder CEO at EO Charging. We provide turnkey electric vehicle charging solutions to fleets predominantly. So vans, trucks and buses and depots. We also have our own AC charging product, which we sell through wholesalers to installers and homeowners.
Phil, what are you working on? You have a very interesting job title and a very interesting job, no doubt.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Future Technologies Evangelist. This is quite a title. In fact, I gained an extra extension to my title yesterday as well, the Energy Efficiency Guru, because I've been on a couple of BBC reports recently. My role and what my team does is really R&D. We innovate, we experiment, we find all sorts of fascinating technology like electric wallpaper and digital bricks and voltage tricks. In fact, Dan Caesar came and interviewed me at the Fully Charged show 2 years ago. We talked about it as YouTube. He's talking about that. But obviously at Octopus, we are doing all sorts of things around smart energy and technology, so tariffs and agile to intelligent Octopus and everything in between, connecting up appliances. We're installing heat pumps, solar battery systems, EV chargers, selling EVs, and so on. We might see actually at some point, I keep looking behind me because my heat pump is going to go into its defrost mode in a moment. We'll see a live demo of a heat pump in action.
Robert, I don't suppose your heat pump's on at the moment, being
it's definitely not. Well, I mean, interestingly, I've turned the air conditioning off because it is a bit too noisy, but because it's very near where I'm sitting. But it is essentially exactly the same technology. It's just working the other way around. It's just taking the heat out. So my name's Robert Llewelyn. I'm the founder of the Fully Charged show. We've been going for 13 years. We still haven't quite got 1 million subscribers, but we're getting very close. We get about 1 million views a week. We cover everything we possibly can in relation to electric transport. So the widest possible remit of that, not just cars and home energy, and also just renewable energy grid, the changes to the grid around. And I think it's important to point out that it's about a quarter of our audience is in the UK. So it's a very international show, and that is now reflected in the fact that we do live events all over the place. So I'm in Australia because in about just under 4 weeks' time, we have our first live show in Australia, and it's always a struggle to get those shows launched at the beginning. But in Australia, we're seeing it is an extraordinary explosion of activity here, and the show is sold out in terms of the exhibitors. There literally is no more space. We can't cram anyone else in. So it is, really exciting time here, and they're kind of behind in some ways and way ahead of us in others. Rooftop solar over the whole country, over 40% penetration. So 40% of Australian households have rooftop solar. It's not far behind with batteries. Really common to have a battery in your house as well. They was one of the first nations to adopt that. Amazing amounts of renewable being put out in the outback, and wind and solar, and huge grid batteries. I mean, the first really, really big battery was put in South Australia a few years ago. It's proven to be very, very profitable. If nothing else, it makes money. So we're seeing some really exciting innovations here, but also all around the world. And I think that's the important thing to remind ourselves when we kind of ground down with the negativity in our own country, is to remember that actually around the world, this technology is, changing things at such a pace. It is extraordinary to witness.
And you mentioned how Australia are ahead in many ways, and you've just given plenty of examples there, but in what ways aren't they ahead then compared to?
It really, in electric vehicle adoption, it's growing very fast, but they are behind in that without question. And that's partly because of the way global businesses operate, so that it's not a very big market, and they have right-hand drive cars, and so they kind of play second fiddle, if you like, to us. The UK is quite a big market with right-hand drive cars. So there are now companies in Australia that are importing second-hand cars from both Japan and the UK, so that they're kind of boosting the market a bit. But it's certainly a little bit behind. But to be honest, every other car in Australia is a Tesla. Tesla have done okay here.
Yeah.
And there's a very comprehensive supercharging network all around the East Coast and right down to Adelaide. So that's the popular car here at the moment. But the Chinese ones are appearing thick and fast. My sister-in-law has a BYD Atto 3, which, apart from some quirky bits of interior, is an extraordinarily competent, really, really good car. I was really, really impressed with it.
Could we get the panel views on the H2 rhetoric as a heating source in the UK? Because I've been avoiding. Phil, that might be quite
yes.
On
I had a very popular tweet on subjects of hydrogen going into homes. So because I have a heat pump, I could sit in the background by the rabbits. It's not gone into its defrost cycle yet, but it will do. When that was installed a year ago, we had the gas meter removed by Octopus, of course, and we removed the gas meters for free. Now, Cadence, who's the gas network, they contacted me a year later, so about a month ago, so the middle of January, and said, right, we know you haven't got a meter. For safety reasons, we need to cap off the gas connection out of the street. So I've still got a live gas pipe in the utility room, just with no meter on it, just capped off. So for safety reasons, they have a process a year later to go and disconnect you at the street. So whilst the gas engineer was here, he started saying that the trial of hydrogen in a village, I forget which village it is going really well. I said, that's interesting. I've got a heat pump. Have a look at this. And I showed him and explained the 3.5 to 4.5 efficiency, and he couldn't get his head around. How can you create energy? Well, it's in the air. What's coming out the front is cooler. So now I was saying, if you take electricity generated from a wind generator, you lose a little bit in the transmission efficiency and so on, and that arrives on my house, and I get 400% out of it. You take hydrogen, you've got to convert it into hydrogen, so you lose 50% almost of that, and then you've got to get it through all the gas network, and then I've got to burn it in the efficiency of that. So you're down at, say, 30%. So there's a magnitude of 10 difference between 30 and 300. And then I said, so how are you going to put hydrogen to my house if I had gas? Because we know that the pipes are brittle and it leaks and so on. They say, oh yeah, what we do is push a plastic pipe through the existing metalwork. I said, okay, go on, explain how you're doing that, because you've got a joint. And he said, yeah, we'll cut off the street. Okay, so now we're off gas for a few days. They'll dig up the street and push that pipe down the whole street. And then what they've got to do is dig up each connection point where we all have our own connection onto that gas pipe, and then push another plastic pipe down inside to each house. And then hopefully it can get around the bends. If not, you've got to sort that out, and then put a new meter on. And then you've got to change the pipe work in my house, because I've got steel pipe work to the decommissioned fire and to those copper pipes of the gas boiler when it was here and so on, and then reconnect all those plastic pipes, and then do that for the whole street and get you all back on again. And I put that out on Twitter, and I was amazed at the amount of kind of positive responses that wow, can they really think that we can do this for a hydrogen network? So it doesn't make sense getting the infrastructure to support it, and when there's a 10 times difference on the heat that you get out from it, again, it just doesn't make sense. So
with the advent of battery storage and all of those things, I mean, what are the possibilities for self consumption then, and self-generate and generation? Because that whole market is taking off. When do you foresee when we will become prosumers and not consumers? How far away from that point are we? I don't know whether you want to pick up on that, Charlie or Robert, just to start us off on that.
I mean, I'm happy to dive in just briefly. I mean, from my personal experience, it does work. the technology works. That's certainly a key thing. I think just wanted to quickly hark back to the hydrogen pipes, gas pipes. It's just so insane. But what we must remember is it's got nothing to do with renewable and renewable hydrogen. They're not genuinely talking about producing a green hydrogen from using renewables. They're talking about steam, extracting it from natural gas. It's to maintain their control of the market is 100% the reason behind the obsessive, frantic, desperate push to make sure people still burn a gas as opposed to use electricity. It's almost heartbreaking because you can produce hydrogen very cheaply we already do in refining fossil fuels. So it's basically a fossil fuel. Anyway, I won't go on about it. Massive lying con job, let's call it that, and just leave it there.
You're on the fence then.
Yeah, I'm really on the fence. I'm really in two ways about that. I think there's a vitally...
I'm going to Twitter that. Robert says massive con job.
But there are vitally critical roles for hydrogen in our economy and in industry, and heating our houses and driving cars with it is not the two that are really the most stupid option possibly available. But all that aside, I think it's going to take some time now. I've just been talking to a couple of battery scientists in Australia who are developing new battery chemistries. We've just done an interview with an amazing company in the United States that is recycling battery materials at a much cheaper, much cleaner, much less toxic and energy intensive way, really innovative new solutions for those things. And I mean, all the signs are that in 2 to 3 years, batteries will become cheaper, like solar panels have, like wind turbines have. And it's really when that happens, and it means that, when the crossover with electric vehicles and conventional combustion cars, when that happens. And I mean, the dates have been predicted for the last 13 years non-stop, but it seems to be 24, 25. Around that time is when we'll see battery prices, if we don't have another pandemic and a world war. Those two things may have an effect, and let's be honest. But I think we're looking at the possibility that people having a battery in the house at the moment is for people who are wealthy enough to do it and can and own a house, have the privilege of all those things and have the ability to put solar on their own roofs. But I think there are projects developing here which are really interesting, community batteries. So a lot of people here have solar on their roofs, but they don't want to or can't afford to put a battery in the house. And there's a government scheme here to put community batteries in suburbs so that you have all the benefits of having a battery in your house, but you don't have to have the battery.
Charlie, what your views on the infrastructure keeping up with battery and electric car growth then?
I mean, there's obviously a lot of, particularly recently, actually, there's a lot of articles in the press around how charging infrastructure is so far behind where it needs to be. I think, from our perspective, most charging is done at home or at work. 80-90% of charging is done home or at work or in the depot for operators like fleets. So my personal view is, and we're seeing a lot, infrastructure is not being deployed unless the vehicles are actually being delivered. So our fleet customers, they will delay their programs and then deploy the infrastructure just ahead of time. So you get this kind of one-for-one ratio. I think we're seeing the infrastructure as not a problem. Ultimately it's more around vehicle availability. Last year the biggest issue for us was around the supply chain. So vehicles actually being available, whether you are a consumer looking for a car or a fleet looking for a van or a truck, vehicle availability has been the biggest problem. So we think that's a slight misconception. I think when going back to the previous question, when you think about, and again, a lot of this discussion is orientated around the home, trying to put a slight fleet angle on it, but we're now charging 100 electric vans in a single location. So that's a fleet depot for companies like Amazon, or 50 electric buses in a single London bus garage. these are significant consumers of energy. A fully electric bus depot, so 80 to 100 vehicles, might consume 30 megawatts of electricity per night to fully recharge the fleet. That is an enormous amount of electricity, and if you think about the biggest issues there, clearly getting the right size grid connection into those sites is a massive problem. And so when you think about solutions, absolutely, batteries combined with on-site generation is a perfect solution. Historically, clearly the economics have often not made sense, but I think we're getting to a point now where there is significant problems in getting new connections, and therefore you have no option other than look at alternatives. And actually the economics, I think it was Robert just saying this, the cost of batteries are coming down so significantly that you're reaching this perfect storm where the economics make sense, the practicalities make sense, the technology works, and it's clearly the obvious solution. So we're super positive about where it's headed, and I think the need to create that circular energy ecosystem is not just a need now; it's a must.
Yeah. Thank you. And Phil, Octopus, you're doing some work with the National Grid, aren't you?
Yep. Well, it's a capacity problem. If you look at any industry, like transport, roads, and so on, the grid, you build to a particular capacity. Do you build to the peak, then you've over-engineered it, or do you manage the demand? So trains manage through peak pricing. Energy, we do have peak pricing. The Economy 7 has been around for decades. And we've got our smart tariffs, like the agile tariff and so on, which have got different prices, different times of the day that reflect the wholesale market. What the National Grid is doing is revealing that as a market and saying there is a flexibility requirement. We need less energy to be consumed here, or there is surplus energy to be consumed, and that's what we're doing with the savings sessions, for example. And those have been incredibly successful. We're demonstrating real change with customers reacting to that, and I guess it's kind of going to the extreme when people sit in the candlelight, but people are really engaged in this kind of stuff. I think that's one of the differences, is the way we are doing the energy transition and the technology around it is through engagement of consumers with all of the tech and the tariffs and things, rather than a centralized command and control from government, right? We need to build to the biggest capacity, and nobody's going to change their behavior. The technology is never going to control cars to charge them at different times of day and all the rest of it. And you've kind of got that kind of dominating, we'll just have to build the biggest capacity we can approach. But we're proving that the technology and the consumer engagement is there that can make a difference. And that will reduce the investment required in the grid. So although we're in an energy crisis, it should mean less investment is needed in the grid, because we're going to start to smooth out that capacity. Then home batteries and cars doing V2G become really interesting, even controlling a heat pump. So if I can warm the home a little bit more at certain times of day to then let it cool off when there's a peak period, which I can see Andrew, and I recognise your name, Andrew, and I think I've seen you on one of when we did the calls a couple of weeks ago, is participating in that with the trial that we're running with Nesta. So I have control over Andrew's thermostat and turning him up a little bit for an hour and then down a bit for an hour. We did break it, Andrew. I think we left you cold for 15 degrees afterwards. That was a mistake on the technology. That's research. That's R&D. It's experimenting with technology.
Charlie, when you're having conversations about trying to convert people's fleets, to electrify them, I'm presuming you're not just engaged with the fleet management people, but it's the facilities, it's the estates people. I mean, are they already thinking about putting solar on the top of their warehouses? I mean, so from a vehicle or fleet to X there, does that work for them? How do you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, the whole ecosystem is slowly or quickly being joined together. So our customers, big operators, whether it's Amazon or DHL, have historically had significant programs to put solar on the roof. These are big distribution centers. They've got multiple megawatts of solar PV on the roof. Interestingly, having a conversation yesterday with one landlord who owns lots of distribution centers, and his customers or his tenants are only consuming about 7% of the electricity they're generating on the roof at site. So most of that electricity is actually being exported. So going back to the previous question, as you think about the introduction of whether it's cars, so for employees, or vans and trucks for the fleet side, these are vehicles that now need charging using that electricity. So there will be a significant increase in self-consumption. As you think about vehicle to grid, you've got last mile and middle mile. So last mile is vans traveling into cities and delivering lots of parcels, but only traveling circa 30 to 40 miles a day. And middle mile, which is a bit longer, but ultimately these are small lengths to travel each day, but then those vehicles go back to a location for 8 to 12 hours at a time. So you've got increasing battery sizes of these vehicles, but only a small part of the battery is being used each day. So, and you've got a known load. They are coming back at roughly 5, 6 o'clock. They're getting picked up at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, every single day, 5 to 7 days a week. So you've got a known load to work with, and therefore, actually, hypothetically, it's a perfect use case to do vehicle to grid. So as we think about what our customers are asking us for, or what we're wanting to do for our customers, absolutely, vehicle to grid is starting to enter the conversation.
Robert, in terms of, the world and their wife in this sector. What can you see that's coming down the line that's just going to sort of defy that movement?
It's very hard to really predict it, but certainly, like one of the very impressive projects we've seen is in Utrecht in the Netherlands, where I'm just trying to remember the name of the company now, which is very embarrassing because I want to give them a plug. They're very good, but they're a car sharing company. Yeah. We drive solar. Thank you. It's come to me. That's one of it. That feels like a small victory at my age. Yeah. We drive solar, running now. I think it's around 600 bi-directional chargeable cars in Utrecht that all have dedicated parking spaces and bi-directional charge points on the streets of Utrecht. It's a really popular car sharing program. We actually met some people who had sold their Tesla because using the car sharing scheme was better, because they can also have a Tesla. Their range of cars they have includes Tesla Model 3s. And it's, they go from Renault Zoes to Ioniq 5s to, I don't know about Porsche Taycans, but certainly a lot of Teslas. And that has been, they control the consumption and production of from those vehicles. And it's getting to a point now where it's the equivalent of a gas peaker plant. They can call on in for like an hour in the evening. They can actually make a difference to the grid demand in Utrecht, in the city. And what they're aiming at is literally thousands of cars like that. I think they're talking about having 8,000 bi-directional capable vehicles in the city. That's their aim. And that would be the equivalent of a large power plant. It's when you see it on that scale that's really kind of inspired the people of Utrecht to kind of push for that. But also, I think equally important is the change in mindset about owning a car. This is from the point of view of private car ownership. The downsides of that, which I'd never thought of before I had an electric car. It never occurred to me when I had a petrol car that I left it parked on the street for 90% of the time I owned it, didn't go anywhere near it. And is that possibly a waste of a very important piece of technology, an expensive thing to keep going? And the idea that you use a car when you need it and you don't have it when you don't need it is kind of appealing. And the public transport, the cycling infrastructure in Utrecht, is when you see that, it's like heartbreaking for the rest of the world, because it's so good, it's so advanced. A huge number of people ride bikes. They don't use cars anyway. They use the tram or they use the electric buses. And when you ride a bike in Utrecht, you don't go on a road with cars, you go on a bike road. There's only other bicycles on it. And they've got suspension bridges for bicycles. You know, it's at that level. Multi-story bike parks at the station where they can park 38,000 bicycles. You know, that's, in a way, you see that and you go, that is a city I would love to live in, because it's much quieter, it's much cleaner, it's much safer for people traveling around, and people are much fitter, you know, because they're using bikes. So there is that flip side of it, but the car sharing really fits in with that, because then you can have less cars, but they get used more, and they can then be used 24 hours a day because they're an energy storage system as well.
Do you ever anticipate a time when there would be fleet sharing, Charlie? Or is that just the way the business operates? They wouldn't be able lose control. They would need to share their fleets.
Now that is a discussion that we're actively in with some of our customers. Yeah, these, like bus operators as an example, they've got buses typically that are out during the day, but they've got these hubs of multiple DC fast charging stations, 150 kilowatt, 350 kilowatt plus, inside their depot that are unused for multiple hours during the day. So as you think about the cost of that infrastructure, like it's multiple millions of pounds typically per site. Clearly, utilizing that as an asset to sell electricity to whether it's fleets or consumers is absolutely an activity that we should start exploiting. So I think the discussion is starting to happen across the industry. People have historically been anxious about that, but I think now they're feeling much more comfortable that EVs work and can deliver people or parcels reliably. They're now clearly thinking about the economics, and that's definitely one way to help alleviate some of the financial burden.
Yes, cool. And then Phil, I mean, again, we're going to get to a day when there's so much energy that's being created by the consumer that, well, not necessarily Octopus, but some of the energy companies, they're going to not be so relied upon. So that would be a perfect day, wouldn't it? Me being
scenario of if all homes were net zero, in the sense that no import, the import and the export balanced each other out, then where do we as an energy supplier end up? Where's the grid? Well, you're still going to have grid connections and grid frequency, because there are going to be plenty of times when you just aren't quite off grid. You're always going to be either importing or export. You've got a battery there and you can be balancing it. I mean, bear in mind that we lease electric cars, we install electric chargers, we install heat pumps, we install the solar battery systems and things as well, aside from being an energy supplier. Often I get asked the question, why are we talking about solar battery install systems, which is reducing the sale of energy? You might say as an energy retailer, we want to sell you more energy, so inefficient homes are a great thing. And why do we want to put solar battery? Actually, it's all about the environment. It's getting us off fossil fuels and getting us onto renewables. We're a very large investor in renewable energy and supplying all that. There is a kind of a balance, but at what point is it economical for the next 10, 20 years between having enough solar on my home, or wind generation and solar generation is so cheap over the grid that actually that's just as economical as investing myself in the solar. But I think we're a long way from getting to that kind of balancing point. But I am a big fan of getting your home to net zero. You're taking part in the grid and you're supporting with your own solar and being able to export excess back to the grid. I mean, then there is the difference between, I'm thinking in a domestic world, but then you've got the businesses that are able to put solar onto warehouses, factories, and all the rest of it that take part in the grid. The grid has got to go through a big change in all of this. We're moving from really large scale nuclear, gas, coal power stations that are big chunky things distributed around the country to highly distributed renewable generation that's much, much more variable. And so our homes are all going to take part in the balancing of that. It goes back to, it's not just a capacity challenge, it's a balancing. Everything is all singing together in sync. Actually, I was doing some interesting research recently. I think it's the 2020 football, when we all turned on kettles in the half-term break, it was the equivalent of 1 million kettles being turned on at once, and the grid was able to cope with it because it could foresee it.
Yeah.
One of the projects I'm working on is around the security infrastructure of the grid. So slightly flippantly talking to Andrew about controlling his thermostat remotely. And a bad actor can control lots of thermostats or lots of chargers or lots of battery systems remotely. You can bring the grid down. And there was the equivalent of a 1 million kettle event. I think it was 2019 when a lightning bolt struck a transmission line which knocked off a gas station, which had a knock-on effect with an offshore wind supply, and affected 1 million customers and businesses. And again, the capacity impact was 1 million kettles. In one scenario, the grid could cope with it because it was prepared for us to all turn kettles on and had generation ready. We're doing it with the national grid trials where we're saying turn down so we don't get blackouts and things. But a freak event can still cause an impact, and it's how fast things can react to that. So things we're doing with Track and Flex, which controls distributed battery assets, and businesses and things can react rapidly to some of that. So it's all about the technology and engaging. So there's going to be a huge role for grid and energy suppliers, even if, going back to your question, homes are getting to a net zero.
Yeah. And when it comes, you just mentioned energy security. So, I mean, is there going to be a time when charging can be done wirelessly? And then I don't know. I mean, technically, I think you can tell that I'm not going to know the answer. But I mean, I'm assuming that becomes more of a security issue as well. Then, if people are able to charge wirelessly, or is there going to be?
I know there are charging companies that are experimenting with wireless charging. It's definitely going to happen. I think we do it with phones.
Yeah.
So Robert.
Yeah, I absolutely. It does. I've seen it. The technology exists. It's been installed in places. I've actually seen a strip of roadway where a Renault electric van was charging at 45 kilowatts at 70 kilometers an hour as it was driving over it. So it was actually charging as it was driving.
Just when we talk about distributed consumption and generation, are we just limiting, and this is why I'm going back on myself, are we going to be limiting that to solar and wind power, or are there other technologies that are going to be added to that sort of roster?
I certainly think that, there's certainly things in development, aren't there? I mean, there's a fascinating company in the United States, Quaise Energy. I've no idea if what they're proposing. They've started drilling. So they are a geothermal energy company, and they are doing a test borehole on the site of an existing gas turbine peaker plant I don't remember where it is. It's in America. And they do traditional drilling down to about 5 miles deep, which is what traditional, like twisting a drill bit through the earth can do. But then they go a further 15 miles using a microwave technology. They basically melt the rock. So they get to a point where the constant temperature is 500 degrees centigrade. That produces enough heat to operate the turbine 24 hours a day forever, effectively. And so that, I have no idea. When you hear things like that, you go, that is either insane or genius. And I really wouldn't want to guess which one it is, but it sounds fascinating. So whether it will work, I don't know. Because the point of that is the gas turbine or system already has a big grid connection. It's already fitted into the grid. It just doesn't need any gas. That would be an amazing step if that technology did work. So I think we're going to come up with quirky alternatives. I've seen Tidal. Tidal is working in Orkney. It's producing an enormous amount of electricity. It's so difficult when you see that stuff and you go salt water and metal and electronics, a really difficult mixture. But it'd be great if it works. And then, I'm talking about, effectively a wind turbine underwater in a strong current. But certainly tidal lagoons could be a huge thing. But the environmental impact is huge. The tonnage of rock you need to build the dams effectively is extraordinary. As one person suggested to me, you'd have to dig up quite a lot of Devon to build the Severn barrier across the Severn estuary. So
I better start
yeah.
looking for a new home then.
Simon.
I'm conscious I'm not being asked any questions from the attendees. Johnny's asked, does the panel have any thoughts on the outlook of British Volt?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll quickly say, because I'm here, there is an Australian battery manufacturing plant being built here, and I know that company have expressed an interest in taking over what there is of British Volt, and they have a very, very substantial financial backing from American hedge funds. So that was news here a couple of days ago. So I have no idea if that's ever going to happen, but it did strike me for a moment that the entirety of British Volt wasn't completely dead, but close.
From a finance perspective, there's a consumer demand to entertain behavioural change. It seems a bit of a tricky moment in time for people to start, or businesses and people to start thinking about these large investments. What can be done there then as businesses on the ground to sort of to ensure this momentum keeps continuing, really? Charlie, you're doing something around finance, aren't you? Because I think people need to be helped and assisted. There must be enough hedge funds to entertain this area.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tricky to change the way we pay for things, but ultimately, when you think about electric vehicles, you've got to consider the total life cost, or the total cost of ownership. The vehicle is the biggest capital cost, of course, but yeah, you've got maintenance of the vehicle, you've got in the short term subsidies, which help it, but you've got the maintenance and then the fuel. So yeah, the biggest cost of owning a vehicle clearly is the fuel going into it. And if you think about a vehicle owner owning their vehicle for whether it's 3, 5, 7+ years, actually, when you compare EV against petrol diesel, obviously the costs over a longer period are cheaper. So from our perspective, how are we helping businesses? Well, electrifying a depot is pretty expensive. You might be paying hundreds of thousands, you might be paying 5-6 million quid to electrify a bus or truck depot. Not every operator has got the finances or they might have the finances, but not the willing to actually pay that up front, particularly when they've got tens of thousands or thousands of vehicles. What we're doing to help is we're actually, rather than selling them the infrastructure and the installation up front, and then getting paid ongoing for software maintenance, we will finance the infrastructure. They pay nothing, but they then pay pounds per kilometre, and that might include just the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
It could include the infrastructure and the vehicle, and even then the energy. And so moving it from, again, a significant capex cost to an opex cost, and they can just bring the driver in the case of the fleet, it allows them to actually model their business much easier, but also takes away that capital strain that they've probably got, particularly now.
So does the panel think new small housing developments ought to have community heat pumps, solar and batteries by default?
Depends on the properties. What caught my eye on that one is what we're doing with the zero bills offers at the moment on new build developments. So we are working with new build developers. Tends to be smaller ones at the moment, but some of the bigger ones are very interesting what we're up to as well. And if a home can be built with decent level of installation, not passive house, but maybe towards the Future Home Standard 2025, with significant amount of solar on the home, with air source heat pump, no gas, and battery storage, then we guarantee a zero bill to the occupant for 5 years. And that's based on modelling the generation capacity, balancing the grid with the battery, deciding when to export to the grid. So typically we look for about 130 or 1.3 times export versus the import. So if it's a 6,000 kilowatt hour import, we need about 8,000 to 9,000 of export of generation capacity. So the export balances against the cost of the import. And there are homes that are doing that now. There's Ilka Homes is the first one. We work with them when we look at the whole site to see which individual homes are suitable, because obviously if you've got roof orientations not optimal for solar and so on, then those wouldn't be applicable. But it doesn't need too much insulation. It's not like going for full passive house standard. It's much more about the solar capacity and controlling it. We have a fair use policy attached to that, of course, because we don't want people to just go nuts and turn the heating up and leave all the windows open and everything else. But the fair use policy is up to twice the normal estimated annual consumption on those properties. We do exclude EV charging at the moment, but that's just simply because the amount of demand from EV charging may be too high and breach that fair use policy. The customers get a statement that shows the kilowatt hours imported and exported and a zero price against them. So we love hearing, if anybody does want to ping me afterwards, who's doing new build and wants to get into that, we've got the team available to discuss the model and how it all works and the specs and things that are needed.
We've only got 5 minutes left. Going back to battery storage and recycling again, Robert, we touched on this previously. I think they're doing. Are they doing recycling on a large scale out in Australia, or was it somewhere else? But
No,
Rob said about how advanced is battery recycling and what the current lifespan of batteries for cars and houses.
Yes, I saw that. I think I think we can now say we're on the cusp where the battery will last longer than the vehicle it's fitted in, of a new car that's built in the last couple of years. I think that probably wasn't the case in 2010 when the Nissan Leaf was launched, but I think that's changed. So batteries last much longer than we expect. I've been involved in 2 really fascinating debates very recently about whether it's better to recycle a battery at the end of its useful life in a vehicle rather than repackage it and use it as a static storage form for a building or something, which is quite interesting because, you know, it made sense to me as an outsider in the outside the battery industry, just repackage it and use it, because the battery is still probably got 80% of its capacity. But the battery recycling is advancing at such a rate that actually it might make economic sense that the battery chemistry is advancing so fast that you want to break that old battery down into raw materials, because you're going to use those raw materials in a different way in a new battery that is much more efficient, that can charge more often, that holds more, has a higher capacity. So the landscape is changing really rapidly. But I think what I'm seeing now, redwood materials, obviously, I think leaders in this field, truly enormous kind of industrial capacity. But what they're actually recycling at the moment is flip phones and old laptops and tablets from 10, 15 years ago, because car batteries, they're not yet recycling thousands of tons of car batteries, because the car batteries are lasting much longer than people think. So I think when people express an anxiety and when they're told you'll throw the battery away after 3 years, you've got to remember we were all told that with very huge amount of confidence by a man called Jeremy Clarkson many years ago. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves what an idiot and a bigot that man is. I just throw that in there just for the fun. But he was wrong, you know. Yeah, he was wrong, and they do last longer than 3 years, and we're never going to throw them away. And anyone who suggests that is a liar or an idiot. Now, we can't really, you know, I can't really be more polite about it than that.
Yeah.
So it's. But I mean, I think what's exciting is one of the new battery technologies, and I would not put money on any of them. I don't know which one it is, but one of them is going to work. And that's going to really change things when we're looking at 10 times energy density of the batteries we're working with today. You're looking at a vehicle with a much smaller, much lighter battery that still goes further than the ones we've got today. So, you know, we're not at the end of the development. We are definitely at the end of development of internal combustion engines, but we're just at the beginning of development of electric vehicles.
Yeah, well, that's well said. That's probably quite a nice place to finish, actually. I will just say in answer to Alex's point about developers having enough roof space for the region 9 kilowatts of solar, Nigel Banks is joining us in I don't think I've uploaded it yet, but he's going to be talking in March for Milka Home. So there's this webinar has touched on many topics that we're going to be focusing on going forward. And Phil himself will be back on Meshwork in a couple of weeks with William Lake from Energy House 2.0, University of Salford. That's going to be a really, really popular webinar as well. And there's going to be lots of things that we're going to pick up on that one. So that would be an interesting chat. So there's lots of threads within this chat here that are going to lead on to other webinars that we have in the pipeline. But I'd really like to thank you guys for taking the time to out of your day to talk to us today. It's been fantastic, really interesting. Thank you, and I'm sure everyone on the call appreciates it as well. So yeah, enjoy your time in Australia, Robert, and good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good luck with Fully Charged Live in there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Yeah, I know you're a very busy man, so it's great to have you here. And Phil, we'll speak to you in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much, guys. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Thanks, guys.